Every day it gets crazier, and I have to wake up each morning and have a cup of coffee and think to myself, somehow today is going to get dumber than the day before, even
Well,
though I didn't think it was actually possible.
well, how's that happening today? Today, I think the world's getting a little smarter than the day before with Boris Johnson coming out saying they're finally going to rip off people's masks and not go forward with the vax mandates. That was a little nice thing to wake up to today.
In all honesty, I saw it and I thought I was like, oh, this is like fake news. I gotta look through to see if and I saw it like two or three more times, and I was like, maybe it's actually happening. And I think right now is the most interesting place because like their narrative clearly isn't working anymore, and some are dropping off. So it's like the music stopped, and some people are still dancing, and some people aren't. So I'm really interested to see how it plays out.
I am too. Is this the epic blunder that people like us have been waiting for? An epic blunder from the regime, the Davos class, if you will, that finally shakes people out of the the existential crisis that we found ourselves in the last 2 years. I don't know. I hope so. It feels like the expert class has been delegitimized pretty handily the last 2 years, but I think just my nature, Bitcoiner's nature, is to be a bit more optimistic about their downfall. They always tend to survive longer than we expect.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is kind of part of the acceleration of that. There's this class of people that this is all about authoritarianism to them. Like they don't actually care about what that outcome is. It's just as long as we're making sure we listen to people. And yeah, as it accelerates, I'm just kind of afraid that I'm going to find a whole series of people just unavailable to the actual thinking for themselves and logic. And it's pretty scary because I feel like this pandemic was such a great preliminary method to really test people on that. And so I'm still pretty scared. It's nice to see that the UK is scrapping it, but until we're out of these state of emergencies and everything, I'm going to be holding my breath. I'm optimistic, but I just don't expect the state to roll over so easily, particularly after staking so much on getting to roll out these biometric IDs and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to roll over easily, too. You see these headlines, Boris ending the lockdowns and the mandates, but that's just like one little piece of catnip. They'll always drag you back in, and it is. Again, it feels like we're in a struggle for the soul of humanity, if you will, right now. Like, what path are we going to take? Are we going to continue down the path of biometric data collection and certification to get into particular things or even spend money? Or is Bitcoin going to win? Are we going to get freedom? Are we going to free ourselves from the shackles, both mental and physical, that we've sort of put on ourselves over the last however number of decades? Like how?
I mean, we're at a really radical break point, and it's really important to understand. In my opinion, this is a very unique moment in human history, very different from any others before. Because if we get caught in this biometric cage, like there's no extricating ourselves from it. And I think it was really interesting that Chamath, said his horrific things about not caring about the Uyghur people when understanding the Uyghur genocide is super important because like this is the first instance of a genocide where it's not just about killing out the people and destroying their culture. It's about hollowing out the people entirely, obliterating their culture so there's no remnant of it. You can't even remember it or be connected to it. And now you're these vacant, empty bodies to be pushed about. And like that 100% is absolutely what communism wants. And it wants to make sure that everybody is empty in that same way, that there's no God, you don't have a soul, that you're an empty, vacant husk to be moved around. You can be monitored at all times, watched by anybody, have that information accessed by any corrupt agent of the state. And we can't escape it, and I really want to emphasize that point because all other things before this, there's usually been a capacity to escape it. But if this thing gets implemented, I have a very hard time seeing how we destroy it. And I feel extremely hopeful that like Bitcoin is this gem that we have that we can kind of build around to resist all of it. And at the end of the day, like the truth, the freedom, the liberty that we ascribe to and strive for, that's like an infinite cause of generation from ourselves. Whereas like the totalitarian that they represent, it's pretty limited because it's based entirely on a fear predication, and about threatening people and their livelihoods in order to get compliance. So I think in long term, we're going to win. It's just going to be pretty magnificent to see how it all unfolds as it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Chamath, specifically Chamath, Ray Dalio, two very prominent billionaires here in the United States over the course of the last few weeks alone have made very interesting comments, as you mentioned, Chamath, with his completely apathetic, I don't even know if that's the correct word, framing of the Uyghur, the situation of the Uyghur people within China, and the fact that they're being put in concentration camps and sterilized and women raped and stuff like that. And Ray Dalio saying that he thinks that the United States should try to emulate the equal prosperity theme that China, the Communist Chinese Party specifically, tries to imbue on its country. And it seems like, and we've seen similar things like this in the past with the NBA specifically. Daryl Morey, at the time GM of the Houston Rockets, comes out in support of the Hong Kong protesters in late 2019. Adam Silver, LeBron James, and everybody who has a lot of financial interest in the NBA slapped him down, put him in his corner, and apologized to the Chinese government. And it seems like in the West, there's a lot of the corporate and institutional capital class that sees the growth of the Chinese economy as an opportunity to exploit, to produce yield on capital that they want to invest. And they are willing to sacrifice, and maybe they never had the principles, but there are American individuals and companies that should be ascribing to the ideals, mainly the right to freedom, private property, sound money, and bodily autonomy, that the founding fathers set forth hundreds of years ago. But yet they're looking at this potential profit that China could potentially provide them, and they're throwing out those ideals to appease this authoritarian regime, which is quite sickening to see.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they ever had the ideals to begin with, but it's clear if they did that they're extinguished at this point in time. And what upsets me the most about this is like this is more the same bullshit fiatism of this short-term thinking. Because yeah, sure, you can sacrifice all these core values that are fundamentally the principles that make market-based economies work and function the way that we know and understand them. But sure, sacrifice all of that for going into the totalitarian panopticon, getting 5 years of profits from the Chinese based on horrific distortions that don't make any economic sense. And when this all crashes, and the most profound and horrific crash that's obviously coming globally, because we're clearly on the precipice of the second Great Depression. And when that happens, I have a very hard time seeing and understanding how China is going to avoid conflict other than through extreme totalitarianism and general ruthlessness. But frankly, I'm a free market guy. If these guys want to fuck up and go participate with the Chinese, that's their own business. I'll never do business with them. I'll talk shit about them. Chamath also, I hope we don't encounter each other in person. I have a list of people who, well, I won't go any farther, but he's on it. And
No, go a little
frankly,
further.
when I meet shitty people,
Go a little further with that.
Look, I think when we meet these people, we have a responsibility to say, hey, Chamath, did you know, you're the bad guy? And, he'll do all this bullshit, and I'll be like, no, I'm going to hold you accountable. Everybody walks around sucking your dick and telling you that you're the greatest guy ever because you have a bunch of money, but I want you to know you're an absolute piece of shit. And you really need to think fucking hard about saying what you said, particularly with you saying that your family fled from these same sort of circumstances, that you should stop, shut your fucking mouth, and think for a minute. And instead of celebrating how rich you are and making that about how great of a person you are, why don't you stop and think about what you just said, how fucking wrong it is, and maybe try to actually do some work to change the world in a positive way, because that's what you represent and what you want to do, right? or are you just another fucking liar and sycophant? Because I actually think that's the real answer. So, man, if I was to encounter somebody like Kissinger, I would just kind of beat him to death in the bathroom because fuck him entirely. Well,
Yeah.
and I hate these people that say they represent American values when they're just fucking violent totalitarianisms that want to use the military-industrial complex in solely our good fucking name. It really upsets me.
It upsets me as well. I love your passion right now, and Chamath specifically, like he's always been the guy. Like, oh, I was part of social capital, I was a seed round investor in Facebook and all these social networks, and they're doing evil in the world. Like, he LARPs about that. Like, my kids will never use it, but he's still reaping the financial benefits of those investments that he made at that VC firm. And
Well,
no, it is
like I'm mad, man, because fuck him. The fact that there are real people out there that are suffering under horrific conditions from the fucking Chinese communists, and he says it's below my line. Fuck you, man. It outrages me. Like, they're real human beings and they're below your line. Fuck you.
yeah. And
Sorry,
no, no,
I don't like to get really worked up, but like that makes me really angry. These are real human beings. They're not some fucking fantasy that lives in metaverse bullshit, okay?
yeah.
And I feel particularly because I visited China in early 2004, and I had a Uyghur man take me in and explain all of his culture, and it was really beautiful, and I'm not in contact with him, nor was I afterwards, but I just think about him, and it scares me to think that he might be dead at this point just because of who he is and what his religion is. It's
Yeah,
fucked up and it's wrong, but below his line.
well, it's very wrong, especially if you consider the history we've been taught as individuals here in the United States too. I mean, World War II, obviously, the Holocaust is high on everybody's mind who grew up in the last 30 years, went through school the last 60 years, like never again, and it's happening today. And people, that's the thing that really. And I wrote about this in the newsletter a couple of days. Like, we're getting to this point in America, like the Chinese and American economies are so intertwined and interdependent that like we're at the point where we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves and start asking and answering these hard questions. Like, do we want to be associated economically with a trade partner that is engaging in all these totalitarian and genocidal actions? Obviously, the United States, the military-industrial complex, which you mentioned earlier, we're in no way innocent ourselves, but like at some point, you do have to begin to measure and engage these actions and try to say, hey, are we actually doing the right thing here?
Well, and I hope we're coming to that place, and I think Bitcoin's a big part of this as well, is because holding that mirror up and looking at it, there's an impossibility of like, how can we challenge or change any of this stuff, when the financial system's so corrupt, it's so embedded, blah, blah, blah. But now we have Bitcoin. And with Bitcoin, like, there's a way to actively resist this. There's a way to rebuild our economy that's based on these substantial ideas of freedom. There's ways to use Bitcoin and then integrate it into the legal system directly so that, we withdraw the power of the purse. And like, my great fantasy is this idea of various American states making Bitcoin into their legal tender, that causing for competition amongst all of the states. Hopefully it'll cause a lot of problems for the federal government, so they'll have to pull back in, retreat, start, the process of self-healing America from all the screwed up shit that we've done. In addition to the fact that now there's an established legal regime in the United States for a free form of money that is Bitcoin, this can push out into the global economy in an extremely powerful way. And essentially it produces a neo-mercantilism that I think is the best hope for a Western classic liberal society to be able to thrive and have this digital economy and digital space available to us while still protecting our freedoms and liberty. I don't want to say it's a long shot because I feel like it's almost inevitable it'll happen, but the way that this builds over the next, 10, 20 years, it's going to be really fascinating. And the truth is, I think it's going to swing into a pretty dark place for a while. I hope not. I'm always optimistic that it'll go smoother, but it's hard looking down the pipeline and not seeing some pretty dark stuff needing to happen in order to kind of wake us all up.
In your mind, what are some of those dark things?
Well, the digital panopticon, first and foremost, like it's grown so much more powerful since the pandemic had started. And now we've conditioned everybody to listen to the government, be terrified of everything. And once we get those biometric IDs integrated into a system that we can start refusing people, to me, this is one of the most interesting places because, talking about the Holocaust before, I feel like the American version we get is this really, really shallow surface level of that, like, hey, there were these people that were different and they put them in cages and then decided to kill them all. Like, can never do that again. But then when you talk to people about the idea of like a national healthcare policy and the idea of discrete eugenics and saying, hey, like this is where Nazism started from, most people are like, oh no, like that could never happen here. And like, wow, like we're watching these steps actually happen. And so like I think the other dark thing is states unilaterally using the state of emergency to make pretty much anybody they don't like an enemy combatant to deprive habeas corpus from really whoever they want. And I have a very strong fear that they are going to do that to Bitcoiners. So you and me will find ourselves enemy of the state, labeled as enemy combatants that will not be allowed a trial by a jury because of our belief about holding Bitcoin. And I think the state will eventually get there. And it's a dark idea, and I hope that we preempt it by having states protect our rights. But it is a deep fear of mine.
Mine as well. I've almost resigned myself to the fact that I'm already number one on the list, and number two will be physically plucked up somewhere because I'm on that list for being a Bitcoiner. But it is a bit daunting. But like, what would you say? Like, just look at the state of these people leading us. Like, look at the World Economic Forum. Look at Biden. Look at all the leaders of the world. They are just so visibly out of their depth. They're old. They're completely disconnected from the average Joe, the common man out there. They cannot relate to the common man at all. Like, and on top of that, we have the communication tools today, this podcast, being able to video stream, chat apps, social media apps, whatever it may be, to get better information out there. I think for me particularly, what I try to think about is like, how can we better organize these independent information resources, whether it's independent journalism or small media companies or alternative media companies, and really just turn up getting the distribution of the quality information, the signal that highlights the hypocrisy and the abject evil of the incumbent regime, and try to change hearts and minds that way. That's something like I can't stop thinking about. Like, we have the tools. How can we not figure out a way to leverage them to prevent the darkness that you just described from being an inevitability?
I mean, it's funny because I've felt so strongly for so long being committed to my individual anarchist ideals of just not wanting to engage in status politics in any way, shape, or form because I feel like it's inevitable for failure. With that being said, this technology is really new, unique, powerful. The fact that Joe Rogan's getting 10 times the amount of viewers as CNN, I think is a great testimony to that, the broad and depth that your show meets for Bitcoiners. And I actually think the truth is we're like moving into the phase of a recognition of the inherent political that exists within Bitcoin. And I get this concept from Carl Schmitt of that there's a division between the idea of party politics and the political. And party politics is about like how you try to have a liberal democracy integrate everybody and play in a really friendly way. And not like, well, you're a Republican, I don't like you, but like if you get elected, I'll obey and like that'll be okay. And I think what we're realizing with Bitcoin is that there's this way to reactivate something that's truly political, in that it creates deep anonymity with the other political classes, and that we regard the other political classes as enemies, and we don't want to integrate or play with them. And what's substantial about Bitcoin is that we can do this in a completely nonviolent and peaceful way. I don't think that's been possible before, because if you did try that, you could easily be disassembled. And so I actually think what's happening is we're starting to move closer and closer to actually starting a political, like the political movement that's about reclaiming American republicanism from these deeply corrupt powers. And my deepest fantasy is we create a foundational Orange Party that has the explicit purpose of kicking both parties out of the American political process, and putting all these people on trial that have clearly corrupted the law endemically, and then clean shop, because I think unless we actually hold these people accountable, the fact that Nancy Pelosi has made these absurd amounts of money over decades, ripping off the American public by being able to make these trades that she knows she's going to make money off of, it's disgusting and despicable. And I think it's about time we finally talk about both sides are corrupt. And if we don't have some totally new political idea, that we're going to continue to suffer under this. With that being said, I don't want to be responsible for any of it. I'm not interested in really having those. I'm just not interested in the conversations. Like if you want me to convince you of Bitcoin, like go talk to somebody else. Like we can have a conversation once you're here and you want to talk about some of these crazy esoteric things I'm into.
If not you, then who, Eric? No, but it's also like, yeah, if you don't get it by now, like I don't have time to to explain this to you. Come back to me when you're ready. But how would an orange party, something like that, get implemented in your mind? Like, again, going back to states' rights, does it have to start at the state level? Because I'm very much in agreement there. I think Bitcoin's acceptance at the political level is going to happen at the local politics level, at the state level, at the county level. I think we're already seeing that. Wyoming, Texas, Kentucky, a number of other states beginning to, and particular counties within states beginning to posture like they want to be accepting of Bitcoin. Miami, obviously a city, and that's been like one of the most bullish things in relation to Bitcoin in the last 2 years is all these states beginning to compete for Bitcoiners. I think we need an energy resource state like Texas, Wyoming, Louisiana, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio to create what Alaska did with their oil permanent fund, but do that with like a Bitcoin mining fund.
Ooh.
That's what I want to see is a Bitcoin permanent fund. Somebody make it happen.
Yeah, that, and furthermore, like, as messy as this system has been, like the American system, I think is so great because of the way that it has these state rights that are like sovereign states, like outside of the power of the federal government, which is what we really need right now. And so how I think it happens is actually, and this is funny because this was like something I got really hung up and obsessed with before Bitcoin, but it happens to lead right back here perfectly, is the idea of using an Article 5 convention in order to be able to force an amendment to the United States Constitution to end the Fed and make Bitcoin into legal tender. And Article 5 specifically, because this gets around everything in the federal government because you go through states directly. And so the idea, and this has never been done either, so it'd be interesting to see if the Supreme Court stopped it, which if they did, that, to me, that's kind of the move to show that it's time for true revolutionary action. But essentially, if 35 states pass an Article 5 resolution through their state legislature saying that we ratify the U.S. Constitution with this amendment, after it passes 35 state legislatures, it's supposed to be like it becomes an amendment to the United States Constitution at that point in time. But as I said earlier, this hasn't happened in U.S. history before, so that there's a real question of if the Supreme Court would stop it, which I think they would be to the risk that it has. But to me, this is how a whole movement kind of gets activated. And we really lean back on state solidarity and reasserting the 10th Amendment in a very radical way to essentially ram back all federal power and go, no, like you guys are not a sovereign entity in this state. The state of Texas has sovereign rights here, Wyoming or whoever else. And I think it has to come through states in that specific way because of the way the federal government is just too far reaching, it's too powerful, it's too unavailable, it's too susceptible to corruption. And the other nice thing is, as Bitcoiners, we happen to have quite a bit of money at this point in time. So if we need to start bankrolling this stuff, these people are spineless, willy people that are going to easily capitulate over, $10,000-$15,000 will do what we say. Which, like, by the way, how gross is it that like you can buy a politician for like that little of money? So,
it's very gross. It's very gross, and it's just a example of how corrupt the system is, how rotten it is. Like how, like is this one? It's a big conversation going on right now. I saw Paul Graham, I believe, tweeted
Yeah.
Something about like the quality of life is the best it's ever been, and a lot of people are complaining about the plight of the world and the existential dread that exists. And he made the argument this is the best time ever to be alive if you're a human. Which, I mean, it's hard to deny. Obviously, we have this technology, we're doing that, but there's something culturally that's missing. There's a cultural aspect. Yes, we have all this GDP growth, we have this technology, we have these capabilities, but the culture is very sick if you take the time to observe it, dissect it, and understand the values that it's espousing on the public.
Well, I'm like, I just hate this viewpoint. Like, oh, you have the internet and TVs. Like, you should be happy. Oh, you're right. Like, it doesn't make any sense why the 18 to 50 crowd is killing themselves in record numbers and overdosing on drugs in record numbers. But yeah, we're happy. And like I have a really hard time with these really rich guys spouting off about their shit because oh yeah, like best time to be alive if you're human, right? Uyghur people, like Jesus fucking Christ, like it just really drives me crazy that these guys think because they made a bunch of money that they have the answers for everybody else in life. And to me, again, like this is about how deep into the corruption we are. Like, words almost fail us at this point in time to convey what's even happening because people are so locked into the hypnosis of this spectacle that they'll believe that stuff. And when you talk to them about the idea of like, do you have a soul? Is there an afterlife? Is there a purpose or meaning to this world? Like, what is our being? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to try to live an honorable life? They almost laugh at these kind of questions, and it's really sad because like they have this real perspective that you know you don't have a soul. There's nothing beyond the world other than material stuff. Uh, this is your one chance to get all the crap that you want, so you should do it. And if you do it, that means that you're a great and wonderful person who obviously has made great choices in life. And it's just wrong. It doesn't have empathy, it doesn't have support, it doesn't have understanding, and I really struggle with it, and it's really hard because you can feel crazy a lot of the time thinking that there's something wrong with the world. And I mean, I think I'm not sure about your experience, but my experience before meeting other Bitcoiners was pretty difficult. And for a long time, I just kind of thought I was crazy about Bitcoin. And then when I like met these other people that kind of saw it too, I was like, oh shit, like I'm not crazy. And it was just like it was such a helpful understanding that like, not only am I not crazy, like I just see the world in a pretty different way, maybe a more classical way. And I just had to find other people that see and feel that. And I think connecting with those people really helps you start to clear away kind of how corrupt and crazy everything is, and start to see what we value as people, what we want to build together, what we want to create. And it's really wild that Bitcoin is acting as this global shilling point for like everybody who cares about moving past the nihilism of the contemporary society. It's fucking awesome. And I also think like we're just like a couple years into it because I feel like the signal was put out, everybody started to congregate, and we're like, oh shit, this is real. So like, what's next? And I feel like that's exactly where we're at right now, and it's super exciting.
It's very exciting. It feels very real. I mean, for me personally, I was very angry before I found Bitcoin. Again, I was 30 years old. I was senior in high school when the great financial crisis happened. Obviously, before that, 9/11 happened when I was 10. The Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the wars in the Middle East happened. A very impressionable point in my life. Followed up immediately with the great financial crisis. My dad was in finance. He got beat up from that stuff. And I was just like a very angry 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old and found Bitcoin. I was like, all right, this is the solution to this problem. I mean, I couldn't identify exactly what the problem was at that age, but I knew it had something to do with the financial system, something with the money. And Bitcoin came. I was like, but then yeah, I found Bitcoin, and I was that friend and family member, just like annoying people. Like, hey, this is very important.
When that click happened for you, did you kind of lose it for a little bit? Because like when after I read the white paper, I felt this thing like slip in my mind, where like I just felt like I had smoked meth and crack at the same time, and I was like, oh my god, this is it! I was like running around crazy. I'm like, look, but the money in it connects the points, and it's gonna save everybody, and it's like Jesus putting money in. And people were like, okay, Eric, like
Yeah.
calm down, calm down. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's gonna change everything. And they're like, okay, relax.
Yeah.
Um,
I was working.
and it's awesome because
Oh, my
go
bad.
ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say I was working at a fund at the time. I was an analyst. I was like literally sitting at my desk. I was literally the personification of the meme. Like I got fired from work because I didn't get fired from work because I was just like reading Bitcoin stuff. But I was at work just like reading and consuming as much Bitcoin content as possible, and then like take my headphones off, like look at my coworkers, like we got to be looking into Bitcoin. They'd be like, "Shut the fuck up." Like it's I'm like it's going to change because we were trading currencies, commodities. I was like, this is going to change our business. Like we're going to be able to settle this global currency to do energy trades. We don't need all these FX pairs anymore. We've got a distributed digital currency now. Like we should be thinking about this. They're all like, shut the fuck up, dude. Like please shut up. It's like 2014. And I was like,
Yeah, that I was 2013. I was at a bank. Same thing. Wasting all my time on Reddit, like trading, writing about it, thinking about it. And I remember I had a meeting with the CEO to talk about like how we are gonna advance tech at the bank. And I was real excited because I was like, thinking about pitching Bitcoin, all this other stuff. But I go into the meeting and it's just about like adding iPads and all the branches and everything. And it was funny because after we had that meeting, I literally walked immediately back to my desk, wrote my resignation, and gave it to him. Because also, like, I was talking with Olaf at Coinbase at the time, and he was like, "Come on board, we like need you." And I was like, "I don't know, like, join this insane Bitcoin company over my cozy job at the bank." But yeah, after that, I was like, "Fuck this nonsense. This isn't going anywhere." So happy I made that decision. It worked out really well for me. But yeah, it's interesting because early on, I with working in the Bitcoin industry, people like it was this fun thing, but it didn't have any of the air about it today. And I actually feel like we had to go through the block wars in addition to getting shitcoining to kind of like help focus Bitcoin in this way where it is today. And I also think that that's why kind of everything has been initiating over the last 3 years as opposed to like the last 10 years, which is pretty interesting.
agreed. Because I think if I recall correctly, and I just like going back my experiences, my memory of how I was consuming Bitcoin content and what Bitcoin Twitter, it was crypto Twitter. Back in the day, it was just a bunch of traders sharing charts. You had Luke Dasher and Lop and John Carvalho back then, and Shinobi on Twitter, Mr. Hodl as well, talking about like core development stuff like that. But most of it was, from my recollection, just traders sharing charts, and it was a lot about the gains and the what, but not about the why. And I think what you're getting at is the last 4 years particularly are getting to the why. I think the Bitcoin standard was a big catalyst for getting people to think about the why money, why particular forms of money, why is it important, which is the number one thing we should have been focused on the whole time, because that is the problem. The money's broken. People don't understand. People don't even understand why we use money. I mean, they get that you give somebody $1 bill and they'll give you a good, but they don't really understand the technical underpinnings of using a medium of exchange to exchange and store value over time, which I think the last 4 years we've been getting into the why, not only why money, but why from a value perspective too. Why should we lower our time preference and decide to invest in things that are more worthwhile than the ephemeral consume culture that we have today?
Yeah, and I think we needed all of this scaffolding at first to start experimenting with it, seeing if it was possible. Like what I think because we're so deep into this, like we don't have as much appreciation for the fact that like Bitcoin just became a teenager. I'm like that care that it needed to kind of get it through, and the nurture it needed in order to help cultivate it growing. I don't think it was possible to really think about these much bigger and deeper why questions until it started getting powerful enough that we could feel confident that it couldn't easily get crushed out. In addition to, like, I think there's something really substantial about sitting with the questions, contemplating them, taking them seriously, and then also like having that inflect back upon us. I find it really interesting how the question of, you know, like what is money? There are these two levels to it. There's a real surface level one that most people understand of like, oh, it's the thing I use to exchange like buy other objects, and like that's how it works. And it reminds me very much of Heidegger's idea of being. Like, you know, we all understand who we are as people and what our being is. Like, I'm me and I'm Erik, and that's my being of who I am in the world because I'm me. But when you start to dig a little bit deeper at the question, you realize that there's all these really complex aspects of it that you'd never really thought hard about before. And I think Bitcoiners have been picking at that with money. And that's essentially been developing a rabbit hole that's allowed for people to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's hilarious too, because like, you know, you show up for number go up, and like as you dig, you're like, what about my soul? Like who am I as a human being in the world, and like what do I want to do? And it's just super funny that like this, what people thought was just money in their approach into coming in it was really this induction process to contemplating what value is at a much deeper level. And it's very important, particularly where we're at in a world that presents itself to offer unlimited materialistic pleasures.
Yeah, which is a perfect comment to segue us into what I actually have as like the title of this episode. I just threw it up there because I was on cryptosovereignty.org today and rereading some of your old pieces. And the last one I had up before I came over here to speak with you was Bitcoin as Messianic. Like, has it been bestowed to us by God to save humanity from the sick consumerist culture that you just described?
Yeah, and like I think it's interesting because I think so many people probably read that and they go, ugh, and like immediately walk away. And like I want to empathize with that. I understand why someone would have that perspective, but I really want to give you an opportunity to read it because with this state panopticon thing that's getting deployed the way that they're regarding people, the internet, property in general, it's pretty clear to me that the state's acting like a god at this point in time. And that's like a pretty bad aspect to have going on if you want, you know, like freedom and liberty to actually be parts of your society. And so I think Bitcoin's messianic because the way that cryptography protects us is unlike any other institution or thing that's existed before. And it's really hard for us to wrap our head around that we can enter into a free relationship with Bitcoin utilizing its core cryptography to protect our wealth. And that like there's no exceptions to that whatsoever. If you have secured your Bitcoin properly and appropriately, it doesn't matter if the United States government and the Chinese Communist government are working together to try to extract that Bitcoin from you. They won't get it. And that truly is messianic in a world where the state has given itself the right to extract property and wealth from anybody for any reason it chooses fit, particularly under a state of emergency. You know, and this is where my work starts to go really deep, is because I've focused so much on Schmidt and the idea of what the state of emergency is and how the sovereign exception can essentially destroy the entirety of the law. I think we're essentially at that place with money because it's really clear there's no sort of legal standards at this point in time that are actually governing the way that we issue money. We have this board of governors. They have some bylines that they account to, but the fact that we have several members of the board of governors resigning because of their unethical behavior, and the fact that despite the fact that it's unethical behavior, they're not being legally punished for it, should really highlight how much we're in a space that like this actually has very little legal aspects about it. And that's deeply troubling. You know, we all use money, and it goes back to the same thing that because people don't understand this and how dangerous of an aspect this is and how much power these individual men have, we really can't address it, in addition to the fact that there isn't any particular process right now in order to try to renew money in a meaningful way through the legal process. And it's deeply disturbing, and like this is essentially causing for the collapse of the world as we understand it because of how The fact that gasoline prices have doubled over the last year is really, really wild and very concerning and alarming. And I'm quite shocked and surprised that more people aren't more upset and alarmed about what's going on.
Yeah, well, I think it's not going to be long before people start complaining about all rising prices, not just gas. I mean, inflation does not seem to be transitory at all. And so there is, I think, in 2022 going to be a social tipping point where people begin to get maybe not even angry, but just scared about how quickly prices are rising. I mean, like in the stores here, I was at HEB here in Texas over the weekend, and there was a lot of empty shelves. Like it was actually pretty jarring, like walking through the HEB here, that there was a noticeable amount of empty shelves. And Whole Foods, I was there a couple of days before that. Everything was full, but you see these little signs begin to peak in: rising gas prices, rising food prices, empty shelves. It's like, oh shit, things have really gone awry. But back to your comment about the Fed governors and the unethical activity they engaged in with their trading as well. Like that is another thing that people really have to realize about the monetary and financial system that we are currently forced to live within at this point. Like it is inherently evil. Like we talked about overt slavery with the Uyghurs earlier, but I mean, you have arguably like humanity, a global level of debt slavery that people, until Bitcoin was created, have not had the option to escape unless they wanted to do like some gold deals with each other behind the scenes. But like we have a global debt slave class that is, as Bree Love says, having our life force sucked from us via the inflation tax that nobody agreed to or opted into. And these people that are in control of the monetary spigots too, they're out there and they're taking their privileged access to the spigot of money, and they're overtly benefiting from it financially, personally, and they're not getting in trouble. Like this is evil. There is no justice with this stuff, and people should be angry. And that's the most disconcerting part, for me at least, of the overarching conversation of inequality today. It's as people are completely arguing about the wrong problem. The money is the source of the problem, and nobody's talking about it outside of Bitcoiners and Austrian economists.
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to this problem of people not understanding what money is at all. And so, I'm like, I had the same when before I was a Bitcoiner, when I was a far leftist, I had these same harebrained ideas like, oh, let's just like steal all the money from the rich and like willy nilly, like we're good to go, right? Uh, it's funny because I really realized that like not being an entrepreneur and like not engaging in any sort of process of building capital really like gives you that harebrained idea. And it's funny because recently I was talking to a far left friend, and I got more of this harebrained stuff, and it really occurred to me. I was like, oh, like you can have these perspectives when you don't have any money because you don't have any money. You don't understand how to make it. You didn't struggle to get it. You didn't take risks to get that. In addition to like I have a family member who like when I complain about taxes, they're like, oh well, like you didn't do anything to like make your money. You just got lucky. And it's really upsetting that you take on a risk in a particular way. You dedicate the capital, whatever you do to build your business, and then these harebrains come along who just want to be like, well, you didn't do anything for that. And I think this is really important because this is a component of actual evil. It is not being able to think logically about part of a process and actually come to true conclusions about what is happening there. And it's pretty scary because I think another big part of this is like we've lived in this world where evil's been purported for so long continually. To me, like this is why we live in a world that I would call nihilistic, with that being sort of a false understanding of who Nietzsche is and his work, and that like people don't believe there is evil or there is good or any of these things in the world because they've been subjected to it for so long. And now that we actually have an opportunity to get a seat at the table, the thing that I've noticed the most is that a lot of people don't want to engage with most of this because it's a real struggle. It's really hard to think, like why are they giving us these vaccines if they don't actually work? Like, would somebody actually do that? Like, would somebody do that and like hurt people that bad? And the answer is yes, and you and I understand that. But most people, when you present to them, look, they're giving you shitty vaccines because they're going to make a lot of money off it. They're just like, most people are like, no, like how could somebody be that evil? And like, this is the problem. This isn't a conversation we can have with somebody who's engaging in this. All you will get is prattle and excuses out of it. There's never a point where they go, "Oh my goodness, you're right. I'm evil. Dang." And so to me, this is much more of a question about what do we do now that we see this going on, we acknowledge it with each other, and we have a tool to fight it. And essentially, like, this is where this political gets activated, is by us finding each other and saying, yeah, we're going to put all of our wealth in Bitcoin, and we're going to use this as our means and mode to resist this at this point in time. And this is this sort of what we would call a non-political aspect of Bitcoin that I think is the most political thing that there is. The fact that I can take my wealth and put it in a system that doesn't participate or reward their system in any meaningful way. And frankly, by withdrawing my wealth from their system and putting it in this other one, I'm both making their system weaker and empowering my system. And one of the things that's the most exciting for me is, Gramsci's law has taught us that Bitcoin is, our subjective storage of value. It's a one-way street. We'll never convert to anything else. And there's more and more people joining us every day and dropping out of the other system. So like, this is all just a question of time and how quick we can do it. Is this going to take 5 years, or is it going to take 15 or 50? And I don't have the answer. And I think a lot of it's going to be both about how much the system accelerates and pushes back against us, and how much we greet that and raise the standard of how we want to approach it. Like I said, again, I'm not an organizational guy. I'm not interested in creating the Orange Party, but if somebody wants to take that on and ram it forward, good luck, man. I hope it works.
I think we have intellect on our side. I mean, I don't want to sound too pompous or confident. I do, like, having been in Bitcoin and met more Bitcoiners and interacted with more Bitcoiners and worked with more, and they're truly some of the people that think the most critically that I've ever met in my life. And I think if you have that on your side, it's at least a massive benefit. Obviously, we have a massive enemy to defeat in the state, and not only this state, but a massively bloated state with a lot of weapons. But I think we do have the critical thinking and argument skills, the rhetorical skills to actually defeat this. I think we can win the hearts and minds. I think we are. And what you were mentioning earlier, too, you're basically just describing, like, people don't want to think that these people can be evil. And again, that's the greatest trick the devil ever played, was making people believe that he didn't exist, right? And that is, people don't believe the spirituality. You're describing Nietzsche, God is dead. Like, he's been driven out of society, and therefore the devil has too. So people just don't have the concept of good or evil on top of their minds anymore. It's like, it's been normalized. Evil it's pervasive, and it's been normalized for many decades, like you mentioned. And similar, like the monetary system. I was born in the 90s. I was like, oh, and the dollar existed, and for most of my life I was like, oh, this is money. This is the way it should always be, until I found Bitcoin.
Well, I'm like, with this death of God, like, so God both moves away from us, but it also frees us in this way, like, oh, like, science is this tool that we can, like, randomly play with. And because these guys don't have any consideration of evil, they, like, build an atomic bomb, and they're like, oh shit, like, that, like, killed a bunch of people, and I think we have a lot of this same thing, with quote unquote scientists with the virus. Like, they play with this gain of function thing, the potentiality of it to escape from the lab happen. I'm like, they end up participating in the destruction of humanity. And it's not like because they're out there like, ha ha ha, I want to be evil. No, they're just fucking dumb. And like, they're not thinking about this stuff at all. And to me, like, one of the most revealing things about this is, I remember early on at Coinbase, we used to have different people come in and lecture. And we had this AI startup come in and lecture. My team's full of like a bunch of paranoid anti-status people. So like, they're automatically getting to questions about, like autonomous killbots and that kind of shit. And so they like ask a similar question about this, about like, what happens if it gets autonomous and goes rogue and like he wants to go kill a bunch of people. And I shit you not, the guy was like, I've never really thought much about that. Next question. And it's just like, holy shit. And like same thing. Like I think these guys that are out working for Boston Dynamics, like creating kill robots, you're like, hey, like, what if people start using this to like kill humans? And I think they'd just be like, oh no, people wouldn't do that. And like that's just the end of the fucking story for them. And same thing goes with finance, like with all of these things that you would think people would think harder about this. Like I very sincerely think if you got to go into the board of governors and sit down with them and be like, hey guys, like you guys just printed an absolute fuck ton of money. Like, is it possible that this could have effects that are longer than transitory inflation? I almost guarantee all of them would be like, absolutely not. No possible way.
We can control it. I mean, it's all hubris. Again, getting back to the spiritual nature of it, Bitcoin has pushed me, been very public about this on this podcast, like closer to Christ. I grew up Catholic. All the diddling forced me away from it, but now it's like we need these types of forces of good in our lives, and the hubris that you just described, whether it be via financial engineering, via engineering of AI or robotics or gain of function viruses, like the gain of function virus, like working on gain of function, like thinking that you can be God, that you can change genes and do that and not have repercussions and negative externalities is mind blowing and scary. And like Vitalik Buterin yesterday tweeting about synthetic wombs to create wage equality between men and women. Women should not give birth anymore. We should have synthetic wombs instead. It's like if we're being dehumanized in real life. Again, I think it's an evil. I would call it an evil force.
Yeah, I don't want to deny it is an evil force. What I'm trying to point out is that the individuals engaging it, they can't recognize that. And like it's just prattle, and that's why there's like never this moment of like deep confession and them like coming to understand what's happening. And that's the banality of evil, that like it doesn't have the ability to recognize itself. And I think it's really funny because guys like Vitalik are such a perfect representation of it, because like all the shit he said about the womb, like he believes that. And like he doesn't even consider these like tertiary affects that could happen from it. And I had an interesting exchange with him a few years ago about, he was talking about like living forever and how great that was. And I think I really just like postulated the question of like, don't you think that there's some like pretty serious problems that could happen from a class of people that like live forever, and like new people are trying to be born into the world? And same thing, just like no, not a problem at all. And yeah, it's this hubris, and like it's really important to understand, like, even if you're the most intelligent person in the world and you have this hubris that you believe that you're absolutely right about something, you're now precluding the possibility that you're wrong. And, frankly, this is how a lot of our governments operate, and how, at least in my experience working with engineers, a lot of times engineers can think that they're not wrong about what they're doing. And actually really funny, like, working at a Bitcoin company on the operational side, dealing with engineering, like this was a pretty common thing that would happen. I would have a conversation with an engineer about some sort of bug or a problem that was coming up and being produced, and they would just kind of deny that it was possible because of the way that they built it. And I find that same line of thinking gets applied to a lot of these things in the world that we find are evil, and a lot of times it's because there's this dislocated process that doesn't allow for them to actually think in any kind of an ethical position. And it's really dangerous. And I think there's now a whole class of people like yourself and myself that are not only awakening to that, but the way that, like, yeah, it's ontological, because like we're asking, well, like, how does Bitcoin have this value, and how does it proposition itself, and why does it do it that way, and like how do these things reflect on me, and why is it important to me, and why do I want to give these things to other people? And I just find it so fascinating, because it's clearly unlocking this extremely powerful and potent aspect inside of each of us, and making us not only more powerful and more valuable to the world, but like we sit better and more right with ourselves. So much so to the extent that, like, I think if you and me found ourselves in cages, imprisoned by the state for our beliefs in Bitcoin, and we're essentially to stay there and or die for it, I don't think that would be the worst thing for us to happen. And I actually, at least speaking for myself, it would be a sacrifice that I would feel content with myself, that is how I would move on from the world. Not to say I would meet it with courageousness and bravery. I hope I would, but it gives me something that I care enough about that I guess I'd say I would die for it, and I say that because this is extremely important to me for my children. I demand that they grow up in a world that is better than the one that was offered to us, and that we at least are fighting back and pushing back against these unilateral evil forces and what they represent. And that's worth struggling for. I was talking to my wife about this before, is that stuff is fucked up and it is hard.
It really is.
But it's kind of exciting though. And it's exciting because we have this, we see what's coming down the pipeline, and it's not to say that there isn't scary shit, but it's more that we can stand up and lift our shield, and there's other dudes next to us to the right and left who are fuck these unilateral, World Economic Forum asshats that want to implement this shit. Let's fight together and fight back. And it's just beautiful, particularly when I met Gigi in Miami, it was just an immediate hug, greeting, and all right, we're here to do this together, and fuck it. And it was just immediate recognition, yes, we are one and the same for our cause and what we want to do. And it's exciting. It has created this force of, I don't want to say unlimited energy, but I feel I can keep reaching down in this thing, and the way that it rejuvenates and nourishes me to keep going. And I assume you probably get the same thing for each time you fire up the podcast and that you listen to these great points where you're just fuck yeah. It just nourishes you in this way that you're I'm ready to go back for more.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. I want to leave somebody with a son sleeping in the room right behind this monitor that I'm pointing past, another child on the way later this year. It is an imperative, and I would die for Bitcoin too. I do think it is a cause worthy of self-sacrifice if it ever got to that point. I do not want to die for Bitcoin. I will make that clear as well. I don't want to be sent to a cage because of my activity in Bitcoin and my advocacy of Bitcoin. I do want to be a free man who's able to enjoy my life with my family. However, like you said, I mean, if it does come to it, it's going to suck in some regards, and I hope I do have courage and bravery and some composure if it ever does happen. But I would not like it to happen. But yeah, I mean, this is bigger than all of us. I don't think people really grasp that yet, and that's evident in the fact that they don't grasp the severity of the federal government and the Davos class overreach into our everyday lives. They don't understand the problems with that. How could they understand the gravity of Bitcoin as a tool to fight back against that impending doom? Yeah, it's like you said, Vitalik and people building the robotics, they just don't ask the hard question. They don't even think about these things. Vitalik with the synthetic fetus or synthetic womb tweet yesterday, just speaking on behalf of all women, saying, "Oh yeah, they'd like this better." And my wife, she's 5 months pregnant right now, and she's developing a relationship with the baby. She has a very chemical and emotional connection with the human growing in her womb right now. If you were to just have the hubris to think that you can replicate that with a synthetic womb, it's people are fucking insane.
Well, and the way he just completely dismisses of the idea of what it means to be a mother, I find that astounding. Perhaps there's a reason that a baby literally grows inside of another human being who loves it profoundly and deeply. Maybe that has something to do with the human condition. I don't know. Well, no, And like
Well, it's a
I
part of
don't know,
like
like just the idea of a baby growing up in a tube, isolated by itself. Like I just don't understand how you can look at that and be like, yeah, that feels all right.
I mean, it's already being normalized in other areas. Like we're growing lab meat. Like that's another thing of hubris. Like, oh yeah, we can just grow our meat in a petri dish and we'll get the same nourishment. That's we figured out nature. We can engineer it, which is
My dad invested in this Beyond Meat shit, and I was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh, well, it's like great for the planet and healthy," and I was like, "Dude, like so you sincerely believe that growing whatever this shit is in a lab and like all of the tertiary processes around that production, all the lab equipment, all the plastic, like everything, that this is somehow better than a calf being born and eating grass and then us slaughtering it and eating. Like that's somehow better for the environment." And it was just like, yeah. And to me, like this is the shit where it's just like, okay, so we're very deep into Plato's cave. You think that the shadows on the wall are absolutely real. And when I present to you that they could be shadows on the wall, you guys like laugh at me and throw garbage at me. Okay. Shit. And in all honesty, like I think that this is part of this eschatological process of building. Is that like as we get stronger, the state's going to push back harder. They're going to demand more things from it, and it's just going to keep building and building and building, eventually to this place that like for me, like I realized, like I just can't talk about anything political to my mom anymore because like we don't have words or language to be able to get past anything. And it's really painful because I feel like we like fall into these ruts that the mainstream media has created that like I don't have any way to like escape from the dialogue. And like as I try to escape from the dialogue, they're like, "Oh, like you're saying like all of the far right crazy people stuff," and I'm like, "No, oh God." Um, and I just really emphasize that point because it's really scary, and I think it's very true that like we're gonna find there's several relationships that we have where people are going to be unwilling to move forward with us anymore. Um, and for a long time that was really really painful for me. But then I like met other Bitcoiners, and it was finally like, oh, thank God, like, I don't need these other people in my personal life to understand all this stuff about me. And yeah, I think what we see coming down the pipeline, it's all going to happen. And like we're in the lifeboat, we're going to be good. We're going to create our Bitcoin communities and citadels, and take care of each other. But a lot of people out there are going to suffer really profoundly, and I hope we will keep positions open in the lifeboat for them, keep building our content and education. And furthermore, it's pretty clear to me that we're part of this vanguardist part of Bitcoin, and that our job is to be educating and creating content and helping people. And that's just going to continue to get more powerful and better. And I really think that as it progresses and moves forward and escalates, each encounter is going to push us and drive us deeper into the direction that we're going. And I think it's absolutely inevitable because of how there's this other class of people that are absolutely willing to participate in the state's terror and totalitarianism campaign, and they don't see anything wrong with it at all.
no. I go back and forth with this too. Like, so do you think there's it's necessary to have direct conflict with the state and there's a Bitcoin side? Like, have you read the Benedict option? And basically about how back after the fall of Rome, Benedict, like where the Benedictine monks started, they went out to the woods and created essentially like citadels, and they just ran parallel societies as Rome fell. And inside the monastery was life was good, quality of life was good. People were getting back to like low time preference and good values that were completely driven out of Roman culture by the end of the empire there. I think that's what's happening now with Bitcoin. You could describe it as the Benedict option. We're taking the ball and just playing over here in this parallel system. Just leave us alone. Others would describe it as like a digital cults gulch. Is it necessary to have a direct conflict? Like, is there a possibility in which we make the Bitcoin network so robust, so resilient, and then build a distributed economy on top of that, where it's just honestly a better product, where the zombies who have been lied to again and again by the state and the political class and the corporate class and the media class in the incumbent system finally just see like, hey, it looks better over there. Why don't we just go play over there?
I honestly think that there's a whole segment of people that like literally as they're getting like kicked into like open aired fire pits that they burn alive in, that they'll still look over us and be like, man, those Bitcoiners, like they're why I'm here getting kicked into this ditch. And yeah, I think the Benedict option's the best. You know, like me and one of my good friends, like we're essentially trying to like work on like a private key liturgy that's like executed through a group process with people to try to secure your Bitcoin, essentially like through an actual religious practice that you would do with a group of other Bitcoiners. Who knows how long it'll take me to develop that, but I think running this parallel society is really our only hope. In addition to the fact that I think that's also where we cultivate like all of the good shit inside of ourselves. And I think conflict with the state's inevitable, not because we want it, but because like this is what the state does. It like identifies enemies and it like labels as an enemy and then tries to destroy it. With that being said, you know, the Article 5 option that I put forward before, and with states integrating it directly inside of themselves as legal tender, I think is probably the best option for transition. And I think that also essentially kind of recreates the worlds that like we get Cold War 2.0. You know, electric Bitcoin is the subtitle for that. And it's going to be essentially about, you know, who is on a Bitcoin standard, who is on a fiat standard, how this neo-mercantilist global economy is going to play with each other. And obviously, fiat's going to lose because of what it represents and how it is produced in the world. But it can probably last for quite a while.
Well, that's, I mean, the economist, macro analyst to me is like, how long, especially if this inflation isn't transitory, like at what point, like I described earlier, as it happens at this point this year, where you have a social tipping point, right? Because the inflationary events are two parts. Obviously, money supply expanding is certainly part of inflation, but there's also the social part of it too, where especially if you're running a fiat currency, the confidence in the efficacy of that currency is supremely a prerequisite for it even being functional. Like if inflation stays high for the next 6-7 months, and we see that Biden still can't speak, Jerome Powell doesn't have the answers, nobody has the answers. Like, do people? Because it is inevitable. Like fiat is going to die. There is going to need to be a replacement for it, and that's why I think Bitcoin is actually at a supreme advantage here, because it's had 13 years. It's a teenager that's been able to position itself like, hey, we sort of called this. And in the meantime, now 13 years into Bitcoin, you have all the central banks of the world and governments around the world, the EU particularly, beginning to posture like they're going to launch CBDCs, and they're going to try and transition from the fiat system that they've erected and run for the last however many years and just create this new hyper-controlled fiat system. And so it's positioning Bitcoin like, hey, Bitcoin's been around, it's been successful, and it is directly in confrontation with the fiat system that's failed. Are you going to continue letting the people who created this failed system push you into another one, or are you going to opt out? That was just like a weird ramble there. But
I mean, I would really hope that we would be like, hey, check out our track record over the last 13 years. And people would be like, wow, yeah, like, okay. They're so good at spin, though. I'm pretty sure what's going to happen is they'll be like, hyperinflation is here, and like it's all the Bitcoiners' fault because they want to waste energy on their system. But guess what? Because the government loves you, we're going to give you $500 of CBD coin for free, and this is how we implement the new system. And we're going to give you your allowance of $500 every month now because we love you. And people will be like, yeah, and like, fuck those Bitcoiners. They cause for hyperinflation and they're stealing all of our energy and they're taking all the meat. And like, I just think it's inevitable that we wind up as the enemy here, because in the exact same way that the wealthy class always ends up as the enemy to the communist class, that's what's happening. And with that being said, I think that there's a number of both governors and state leaders that are going to get what's going on and make the choice to move to a Bitcoin standard, and like that's our exit, and those are the places we have to go, and the economies of those places are going to have real growth. They're going to be on a Bitcoin standard. They're going to be export-led economies that are absolutely killing it because they've figured out how to do it. And meanwhile, elsewhere in America, you're going to have, like trains are going to be ransacked, and like, every other car is going to have a security guard with a shotgun. And I actually think we're going to descend into like some pretty nasty shit in cities where there's just like roving gangs kind of stealing stuff because that's okay at this point in time. And it's scary, but like I'm happy that I'm out in the middle of fucking nowhere, so I'm good. But I fear for my friends that are still in cities and places. And yeah, I really appreciate how much more hopeful you are. I think after 10 years of doing this, and how many people I've tried to convince, like people that really should get this, and I'm telling them about it, and there's this thing about actually making the subjective choice to have Bitcoin be your savings that like it's like accepting Christ as your Lord and Savior. Like I can tell you about how fucking great he is and how much I want it for you and how much you're welcome, but if you don't want it, I can't force you.
Yeah, but that's maybe because that's, I feel this as well, but maybe humans are so fucking weird. We're so social, and maybe that's just because we're telling these people, and they're like, "Fuck you, Marty. Fuck you, Erik. Like you're my boy. You're the crazy cousin. You're the crazy family member. Like I'm not going to trust you." Maybe they need somebody like a Jordan Peterson coming out, a Pierre Polivier, however you pronounce his last name, up in Canada, Rogan. Is there? Like, I think like once you get like the athletes. Start pumping it too, it just becomes like normalized and then acceptable because you have the culture telling you that it's acceptable, which for some reason or another normies really depend on that social cue from people they put on pedestals.
I hope so. It's funny when you were talking, I realized that like I've always lived outside of the Overton windows. So, like, I don't know what it's like on the inside, and so it makes it. And like I really hope that 20 years from now, like I'll be talking to my kids and they'll be like, "Wow, Dad, like you got in on this shit early," and like, and let their question won't be like, "How did you know it, Dad?" Their question will be like, "How is everybody so fucking dumb, Dad?" And I'll be like, "Oh, well, like when we get in these big groups of people and we like lie to each other constantly, like you just believe the fucking lie." And they'll be like, "That's weird, man."
Well, it is weird. Like think about it, like most humans are living a lie, and that's the other thing too. I think that's part of the inability for people to be receptive to Bitcoin. Their whole lives been a sunk cost fallacy. It's been built on.
Yeah, well, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to look at that and be like, "Oh shit, I'm the baddie." Let's just put that away and not look at it.
Well, it's not even that I'm the baddie. It's just that I truly don't understand how the world works, and I think I've been around for decades now, and I just have not understood the nature of the world and the mechanics of the world, the economy, the political system that has been erected around us that I was thrust into. I've just been passively playing along as I've been getting played my whole life. People don't want to admit that. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the vaccines, like fourth booster.
Yeah, I mean, the vaccine is the best, but yeah, we can see this throughout society. I mean, college degrees is another great one. God damn, the list just goes on and on. And yeah, it is a total sunk cost fallacy of that. I'm a smart person. I got this master's degree in art history, and I should be an art historian making lots of money now because that's what I was told about the world, but it's just not true. Yeah, and the same thing goes from our politicians. We've been lied to them for so long and so consistently about everything. I'm just really alarmed that, like I have these conversations with people about the vaccines and vaccine passports and about government overreach, and I have a hard time just not flipping out at this point in time because like my bachelor's degree is in history, and I specifically studied European history and World War II, so I'm very well read on the Holocaust. And I just like freak the fuck out when I start talking to people about this and being like, yeah, like the United States has never told people they were giving them vaccines and was actually like injecting them with toxins. Like that's never happened. And they're like, yeah. And then I just scream, I'm like, no, I'm being fucking facetious, you assholes. Look at the Tuskegee fucking experiments that happened. I'm like, let the list keep going on and on. And I think the honest truth is that what we're talking about is horrifying. It is so horrifying that I think the moment people start looking towards that, they have to look away because it's too hard, And to me, like this is part of what like woke liberalism is about wanting to be soft and nice and kind to everybody and modifying all of our behavior to do that. But there actually being a very, very deep insincerity about not understanding or looking at those things in a more critical aspect. It's much more about how we feel than what the truth is.
Which is again making the sunk cost fallacy even worse because you're just compounding the lie there. Like you're not getting to any sense of reality at the core of what like the woke movement is. Like you're that's the thing. Like the woke movement is a communist movement at the end of the day because it completely eliminates the individual. You're a black person, a white person, a BIPOC. There's no room for individuality in that worldview, if you will, which is actually extremely racist when you think about it.
It is, and I think it's so funny of that. We're just at this really fucking weird place in the development of society where, like specifically here in the United States, we have this really weird amalgam of like a corporo communism, and it's really strange. And the way that the left latched onto it, I found like fascinating. Like Coca-Cola with like their like gay bottles and stuff. And like all people are like, oh my god, like Coca-Cola like loves gay people, like this is great. And I'm like, yeah, it's fucking great. Like it totally makes up for them like killing union workers in South America, right? Like it just makes it better. And they're like, are you? I don't understand because this is good. And I'm like, okay, like now that you're with me, like, do you think maybe that they're presenting that they love these gay people as a way to wash over all of the other horrific shit that they did? And people are like, no, that's not it. And to me, like, this is the place that it's constantly disappointing, is that and even better, specifically with the woke stuff, like, I find it hilarious that, like, the left is just getting absolutely fucked on the standards and things that they think are valuable, like wealth disparity, like really big problem. We should actually be focused on it. Like you guys are so focused on the pronouns that I'm choosing that you guys forget that like wealth was redistributed from the bottom 90% to the top 90% to the tune of $2.3 trillion over the last 2 years. But I'm making sure that you feel comfortable with whatever pronouns I'm putting out there are. So I guess we're winning, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a transgender health minister who looks very unhealthy. We've got a woke military now. We're doing okay. We're solving all these hard problems. Hey, the Coke's going to put a rainbow flag on their cans as they kill gay people via diabetes with their end product at the end of the day. I think it's a very sick society, but it's right. Like that's the other thing that pisses me off. Again, going back to the hypocrisy of the world, like. And obviously, I've been a big anti-ESG proponent. I don't believe there's a climate crisis. I don't believe the world's going to end. I believe humans being able to harness energy is one of the things that has gotten us to where we are today. We can only live stream this conversation to the internet on multiple platforms at the same time because of humans' incredible ability to extract, harness, and turn energy into electricity. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, we should be as environmentally conscious in the sense that we should not waste anything, we should not pollute anything. However, we should keep continuing to produce more energy and electricity for humanity because that is what uplifts people from poverty. And it's hilarious that like the woke who care about the poor and downtrodden third world countries are pushing an overtly like the energy policy that they're putting forward is going to revert us back to pre-industrial age society in terms of the ability to harness and leverage electricity, which hurts poor people in developing countries the most. Like they're the most affected by this terrible policy. And that is like, now I'm thinking like, if you can't recognize this, like it's making me very pessimistic too. Like they're going to continue to double down on all this stupidity.
And I mean, like it's the hubris again. You know, like it's they can't consider that maybe their approach to how they're doing this is just all wrong from top to bottom. And it's really frustrating because when because you know these conversations obviously direct themselves towards me, and pretty quick on like the Bitcoin idiot list of questions is like, but it wastes energy, so like it's bad, right? And like, again, I want to rip all my hair out and scream because I'm like, okay, like what's good energy and what's bad energy? Like, how do we make this assessment? Who makes this assessment? Like, if we're so concerned about energy, like, why aren't we building more nuclear power plants for like clean energy in places, you know, like, and it's just really frustrating and difficult because to me, like, I keep coming back to this conclusion that like this is really just about authoritarianism, and like the people that they like told them that this was the correct answer, so they move forward that like this must just be the correct answer. And it's frustrating because yeah, like this obviously is already hurting people. Like look at energy prices in Europe at this point in time. There are literally people that are freezing their ass off right now because they can't afford energy because of the policies that have been implemented around this. And again, like I'm not some person that's like, let's go out and destroy the world. In fact, you know, like I live in a redwood forest. I'm working on purchasing a large portion of redwood forest in order to protect it at this point in time. Like this is something really important to me. But if we're not approaching this stuff from first principles using actual logic, and again, just going back to what feels good, we're inevitably going to run into these same conclusions and problems where like we're not actually addressing what's going on. And it's really alarming because this is how I think this whole thing escalates, and I think it's how it rips its mask off at the end, and all of this becomes eschatological because I think at the very end it turns out it's just raw and pure authoritarianism. State of emergency enacted. Do whatever the fuck we say because we have the power and we're telling you to. Period. And I think as all of this plays out, like Bitcoin's going to be this only way that we have to actually escape. You know, I saw on Twitter that you know Bitcoin Bull has been helping a lot of Canadians sell their houses and get Bitcoin so that they can get out. If we brought that up 5 years ago, you know, like people would say that that's crazy. That would never happen in a place like Canada, and lo and behold, here we are. And let that be a warning to Americans as well.
Yes. Let's not turn. I mean, many parts of America are just as bad as Canada right now.
I'm in one of them.
Yeah, but it's like, so how did we become so detached from logic as a society? Like, do you believe in the methodical, overt action taken at like the education level of things in American society specifically, that there has been a concerted effort to dumb down the masses via the curriculum so that they can't critically think, so that an authoritarian overtaking is much easier because people are willing to take what an authority figure tells them and run with it?
I mean that's a key component, but like there's just a whole constellation of things working on us all at the same time, and so like education's one of them, but the decline of culture, like the lack of fathers in household, it's an amalgam of all of these things together. And it's really dangerous because this has created an ideology where essentially the state is our caretaker, and in more extreme circumstances, the state is God itself. And this is why we have to listen to the state. This is why people believe the state has what's right for us at their core. And I think also that the extrication of any sort of spiritual thought. I don't know, like it's all like a very very sick process because like the hubris has so much to do with it, and the being able to try to assert and force yourself through things. The desire to try to please others, to be nice, to get all of these good feelings. Um, but like my kids don't go to a public school and they never will. And yeah, like it's really dangerous what they teach there. And like one of the things like one of the reasons I made that decision is like I never wanted to have a time where my kids came home and asked me questions about things where I needed to like backpedal and have to like explain myself and like why I'm somebody that's not doing all of the right stuff or listening to the right people. And it's really scary because that happens to a lot of people where their kids are turned against them. And that, like, it's funny because like my kid missed a bunch of school last year because of the pandemic thing. He's missed a whole bunch this last year. He's a really smart kid though. He's reading super well. We go out and play in the forest all day. He can identify dozens of mushrooms and trees. Can tell me about all kinds of stuff. And so like I'm no longer concerned with him getting like a quote unquote education. I realize he's just a smart kid who's going to be able to figure the world out. And I think it's really important if you got kids to like insulate them from that stuff. Like you would be horrified to see the kind of shit that is being pushed out to kids through the public school system as this great thing that they need to know about. Like um, yeah, and like there's nothing wrong about like explaining how kids' sexualities work and the differences between them, but it's really hard for to have a kid come home and ask about the intimacy between two men when you haven't even gone over the intimacy of a man and a woman. And furthermore, like not trying to create a space or a place for people to actually have a thoughtful conversation about that in their own family. And I guess ultimately, bringing back to the question of about education, when we try to just frame education as this like holistic thing that anybody can get, of course you're going to get this fucked up authoritarian response of the answer to things is the correct one that you've been given to the teacher, as opposed to actually seeking out the truth for the right answer. And so yeah, I think it starts really early, and then I think literally everything in society wants us to respond to it in this way, as opposed to a self-sovereign and thoughtful individual. So I think it's really inevitable that we descend into a place where raw authoritarianism sort of replaces critical thought on a whole. And it's pretty scary because, trying to recover that is extremely difficult.
Well, it's particularly scary in this day and age because it seems like it's happening on a global level. In many instances in history's past where similar situations have arisen, it seems to be at least somewhat isolated to the empire of the day, if you will. But what we're experiencing today, minus a few parts of the world, is pretty global, it seems, which is very, very frightening thought, like a globally enslaved populace that is just subjected to this intranational, supranational, authoritarian blob that has been forming via like NATO, G8, whatever the fuck it's called these days, World Economic Forum, those types of entities.
Yeah, and I want to highlight like that's the unique proposition of our current age, and it's extremely dangerous because like it is unique outside of any other time in human history because it can capture everyone, and once it captures everyone, there isn't going to be any possible way to extricate ourselves from it. And again, like this is why I believe that Bitcoin is actually messianic, because it seems to be the only thing that has the possibility to actually fight back and break the back of this thing. You know, and it's not just because it has only that potential, but as you and I have both experienced, the way that we reflect on it, the way it changes us, the way it makes us better people, and the way that it wants us to create community and build together and thrive together, is, in my opinion, the much more important inflection on it. You know, and it's not so much, and I think I have this quoted from Walter Benjamin, like, the Messiah does not arrive as the Redeemer, but as the vanquisher of the Antichrist. Like, again, I get these are daunting prospects, but I look at this global panoptic biometric ID system that seems to be the Antichrist, and it seems to represent unitary evil in a way that I actually can't think of anything that captures the idea of unitary evil even better. And I think it's really important to understand how absolutely dangerous it is to try to have a global identification system that all states have access to. Like, you know, it's really important to understand the relationship between technology and the Holocaust, you know, and the way that the Nazi regime was able to label and identify all of the Jews through the explicit data sets that they had. And, you know, not just the Jews, but the Romans, the Gypsies, the gays, you know, all the people that they wanted to eliminate. They did this with data. You know, it wasn't just them going out and finding random people and throwing them in prison, them explicitly identifying them through censuses and all sorts of other modes of data that they were able to gather. You know, and the fact that they did that 100 years ago should be pretty alarming about how much data they already have on everybody else and what they're eventually going to do with it. You know, and I know we're probably preaching to the choir here, but I guess one of the questions to that we should ask ourselves for moving forward is how do we truly electrify this in such a way that we activate the political that clearly lives inside of Bitcoin that's waiting? And like, again, I'm not saying a political party, I'm not saying an electoral process, but this idea of a movement that's already started and really cultivating it so that we become a powerful force in the world and we can recognize other people that are participating in it and we can continue to build on that together. Because I think we're very close to it, and I think it's really just a point of asking the question and going deeper with each other on how we'll build that.
I think it's happening. I think we're in the process is well underway, like you mentioned. I mean, just me personally, on the mining side, I've advised, again, I'm really pushing this permanent fund, like 2 states. Like I've talked to people at state levels, like who have a lot of resources, and states that are particularly not fond of the federal government and their ban on new mineral leases on federal land. I mean, that materially affected a lot of economies in the United States, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. Bitcoin permanent funds. Like, so if I'm having conversations with people at this level, there are many other conversations from other actors in the Bitcoin space happening. So there is at least the beginnings of influence, and the influence only being conversations and putting the ideas forward at this point in time. But I think there will be action against it. And I think energy is the most important part. That's why I've decided to focus a lot of, pun intended, at my energy on the mining space and the confluence with the energy sector. Because I think once, again, the energy sector, even though it's much maligned right now because people are fucking stupid and don't understand how we've been provided this quality of life that we have today, I think once Bitcoin gets integrated into the stack of an energy company, it's game over. Like, energy is the base of our modern society. And if you go to the energy producers and you say, no, you can't use Bitcoin, but they're like, no, it actually really helps us do what we do best, which is deliver energy to market. It's going to be hard for politicians to try to shut that down.
I mean, like, I'm more excited about the changes that are going to come to the mining sector than I have been about anything else in Bitcoin thus far. Just because it's engaging in a true Schumpeterian creative destruction, that like it's not just trying to make the energy industry more effective or better at what it's doing. Like it is striking at the core of the way that we understand how energy production and dissemination is done. And that's so important because like this compels and drives forward the ability for us to have access to a greater amount of energy. And it turns out if we want to actually be a society that makes it into space and utilizes space technology in a meaningful way, we're going to need an absolute motherfuck ton of energy. And the only way to get a market-based response to develop that is going to be through Bitcoin. And it's really, really exciting to see that space happening. And it's also really exciting to see how absolutely brain dead blind most people are to it. And that's the thing I get with the POW conversations over and over again, is just how there's absolutely zero understanding for how energy markets work. And furthermore, how there's an absolute relegation of responsibility and authority to understanding that to talking heads that are beyond clueless and are just parroting talking points that they're given by the WEF or whoever else. So I'm happy that you're spending your energy there and that more and more people are focused on it, because to me, like, this is where the Americanism of what Bitcoin can be comes into play as well, is states using it as ways to shore up their treasuries. There being competing laboratories of approaches to it. And ultimately, I hope that this can contribute to a Soviet-style dissolution of the United States at some point in time, where instead of us having a really nasty fucking civil war, we're able to just say, hey, you know what? It dissolves. The federal government is bankrupt. They're going to sell off all of their assets to the various states, and the states will make the decision about what they'll do moving forward.
I'm very bullish on that. I mean, I think we're seeing the beginning process of that play out right now the last 2 years with the exodus out of California, New York, Illinois to Texas, Florida, Montana, Wyoming, wherever it may be. I think it's happening, and again, I hope it happens this way because that's the most peaceful revolution. And I sort of think, like, I'm bullish on that. Again, I'm optimistic today. I'm feeling optimistic. I'm just optimistic. Like, just look at the motherfuckers. Look at the people. Look at Klaus Schwab. Look at Biden. Look at Nancy Pelosi. Like, they're old and decrepit and dying. They're skeletons. It's like, it's like they're going to die soon, and I don't see, like, outside of like Pete Buttigieg, we have Beto, AOC, obviously like the core four or whatever. There's like a few of them, and I don't see like a very galvanized upshoot political class that's going to be replacing these incumbent skeletons that are completely fucking up the world right now. Like, I think it dies with a dud. They just, like, people are like, literally, we can't listen to you because you have dementia and you're not even making sense right now. And they're just like, go back to,
I mean,
states' rights.
It's funny. It's really funny that like this is how dislocated and wild that we've gotten. Is there's like an actual man with dementia like running the United States, and like there's all these other like 80-year-old geriatrics who are probably like secretly wearing diapers because they can't control their bowels anymore, and that like they legitimately represent, like, you know, more than 500,000 people for the most powerful country on the planet. Yeah, it's absolutely wild, and I really hope that that's true. But I'm afraid if we don't have some sort of a political response, that like this shit can just pile on top of itself, because, you know, the zombies will be replaced by other zombies, and it scares me just because it's such bullshit conversation. In addition to, you know, I'm in California, yeah, everybody boo. It's, you know, I live out in a very isolated place on the coast. I really love it here. And I keep looking down the barrel being like, did I fuck up? Like, am I going to have to flee my state pretty soon here? And I don't know the answer to that. You know, like, this is my home. It's where I grew up. It's where I love. And I'm going to do everything I can to fight for it. But California has some pretty serious problems, and it keeps moving back into authoritarianism as a way to solve it. And it scares me, you know, because like I have businesses here. I like I said, I have my life here. I own my home here. Yeah, and I do think that I could totally see the state taking it away from me for any number of reasons, and me needing to flee to Texas. And then I'm sure I'll show up and Teguma will laugh at me and be like, haha, I told you that you were going to come here anyways. So hope that that's not true, but you know, if it's how it has to play out, it does. But yeah, we're obviously winning, and like we're getting powerful every day, you know, and people convert to us, and it's a one-way street, and they're never going to go back. And like you said, they're getting older, they're dying, you know, and like yeah, like when we really zoom back out and look at all this on a 20-year time span, I mean, shit, man, like the fact that you built this show and that all this stuff has happened in, you know, the last 3 4 years, and then we think about what's going to happen in the next 20 years, and we're both young guys, so you know, 20 years from now, we're still going to be, we're not going to be in our prime, but we're still going to be moving and doing pretty well. And the fact that we're this far out already, I mean, that's super exciting. In addition to, you know, like we're so far ahead of this wave, you know, like we've like swam up and we're like already catching it and on our board waiting for the rest of the force to come through. And it's real exciting, you know, like we're going to take our place in history. And, you know, I really think like our great great grandchildren will like look back and they'll be like, oh man, you know, like, do you know like great grandpa Uncle Marty was like a huge part of like people taking on Bitcoin in the United States, and he like created all this crazy Bitcoin mining stuff, and you know like he was one of the core people who really helped this stuff happen. And like it's just so fucking cool that we like get to put our hands into this apparatus of history that can like allow for us to participate in a meaningful way on the right side. Like that's super exciting. And I feel so blessed and privileged to be part of it.
I do as well. And here we are getting to an optimistic tune here. Thank you. Thank you for gracious compliments from my future great grandchildren. It is weird. I don't like to like venture into that like thought of people thinking of us in posterity like that. But hey, it could turn out to be true if Bitcoin continues succeeding. But like, let's paint the picture for people. Obviously, we've beaten the dead horse of authoritarianism that's surrounding us and seems to be ever encroaching. I do think we're going to win in our lifetimes. I think it's going to be quicker than many people think. But what does that look like when we do win eventually, in your mind? Like how does society settle around the Bitcoin standard?
I think the augmentations to society are going to be pretty dramatic. I think localism is going to rise up super powerfully just because people don't understand. Like it's always blown my mind talking to farmers about just how much they get absolutely fucked on the processes of how they distribute and disseminate food. And so I think a Bitcoin standard is going to radically change sort of the framework of how we get our food, how we get a lot of things. I think we'll move away from high consumerism much more into a much more digital world. And I actually think what changes the most is the feeling of things. I think you'll get into conversations with people, and you can get kind of into these edgy topics. There's no longer this self-censoring tenuousness that people have. And I also think like all these other really interesting things start kind of unfolding from it because of the way that there's this true honoring of the liberty of the individual to like go out and create and do things on their own. And I think that that's going to have such a huge and powerful impact on development in a way that we don't really understand. And I think like the best equivalency I can point out is if you look at the sort of innovation and development that happens in China versus the United States, it's so stagnated and stultified because of how Chinese culture, you know, through the CCP has approached things, and it's really stifled any sort of creativity or thoughtfulness or ability to play. And I think we've had that same atrophy in America because of you know how authoritarian things are getting. So I think moving back to a Bitcoin standard is going to cause for this sort of Cambrian explosion of creativity and innovation because of the way that people are going to be much more free to interact and do things on their own. In addition to moving to a deflationary currency, I think you know we're going to see a vast improvement in the quality of life of people, changes to how people do education. I think again it gets localized, it goes much more smaller. Hybrid models of digital education start happening, but I think there's just this really kind of radical opening that looks very similar to the United States with the Great Reformation, in terms of there being a spiritual zeal kind of being recreated and inaugurated in people, and people talking about it with each other and sharing, and yeah, just conversations really quickly kind of moving past superfluous bullshit and people being able to hit it deep with each other just because they want it, they're attuned to it, they're available to it. And I think being thoughtful towards money is sort of this initiation process towards it, and that it's not just because they're thinking about money, but they're thinking about value, they're thinking about wealth, they're thinking about long-term investing, about, you know, all of these things that I feel like have gotten forgotten about because of the radical uh, fucking idiocy that like is fiatism, and the like it's so hard to convey how deep this idea of fiatism has affected us. And I think like as we sort of extricate that from ourselves, there's going to be this really deep process of healing that's about building community together again. Um, you know, and like one of the things that I truly feel about Bitcoin is one of the reasons, like us interacting, like me choosing to exchange Bitcoin with you, or you choosing to exchange Bitcoin to me, like this is us deeply honoring each other as individuals. Like I want and demand that you use a form of money that I don't have any possible way of stealing from you, and I want you to want and demand that back from me. And with us having respect towards each other as individuals in that way, and then us offering that to society as well, us saying I want to love and respect you as an individual human so much that I can't steal your wealth, your life force from you. I think that's going to open up a really, really beautiful new world that people are really hungry for, and is really going to speak to them in a way that they've never been spoken to before.
It was beautiful, and I can definitely see that coming. Because think about again, going back to like the existential dread that exists today. Like I think I still know people that are like grew up, good friends. Maybe we're not in contact now, but like I see what they're doing via social media from time to time. And there's like people in their mid-30s. They're like in an office job, 9 to 5 all day of the week, every day of the week, doing shit they hate. And then Friday comes, they just get fucked up. They get fucked up. They get fucked up. Going to the same bars, and it's like, you're gonna wake up. You're gonna be 45. You're gonna have a midlife crisis. You're like, what the fuck did I just do with half of my life? This is a lot of people in society right now. I mean, there is no actual greater calling, purpose, if you will. It's just go do your desk job, get your paycheck, get fucked up on the weekend, and do it again. And you'll have Monday off every once in a while. You got a few holidays and enjoy it until you crawl into the grave. Like that is a lot of our society right now being driven by this fiat world.
And like what profound suffering that is, you know,
right?
to think about the possibility of what we can do. And you know, like I speak to this also as an alcoholic as well. I thank God I got a handle on my problem, but like that is how I approached the world before Bitcoin. You know, and luckily my sobriety came right around Bitcoin as well. But that's how I approached the world. Is I was suffering. I would get myself shithouse drunk, wake up the next day hungover as fuck, repair myself throughout the day, engage in the process again. Then I go back to my 9 to 5. You know, and like this is a slave's existence. This is what it is. You know, and like we look back in history and we go, oh, look at these fucking losers. They were slaves and they couldn't decide anything about their own lives. Yeah, and then like we immediately turn to like, all right, off to work for like 9 to 5. And we're like, hey, Bobby, you like want to come on a vacation with us? We're all going up to the lake for a week. And oh no, I gotta work. I don't have any time off, but I'm free. And it's like, well, maybe we want to take some time to appraise that maybe you're not as free as you think you are. You know, and to me, like, this is why this is all so important. It's like, the money part's cool, don't get me wrong, but like the freedom and human agency that like I so desperately want a world where that is given to people, and where people remember that you are a spirit of light and love, and that you have this profound power inside of you that you can create in the world if you ask yourself to do that. And for me, part of taking on that risk of Bitcoin was making that affirmation with statement of I love you enough that I'm going to take a risk on this, even though I don't know how any of this shit's going to work out. I trust the 21 million units is actually going to stay, and that the supply will be stable, and that this thing works as it has told me it is, because fiat is radically different from it. And making that choice, that break from the rest of society to say, I love myself enough to try out this Bitcoin thing because I want to have savings. I want to be protected from wealth seizures. I want to be protected from inflation. It induces a process of what it means to care for yourself, what it means to value yourself beyond what fiat world tells you, and I'm not sure about your experience, but my experience of making the full conversion to the Bitcoin standard and putting all of my wealth into it, people just told me I was crazy. They told me I'd lose everything. They told me I was destroying my life. They told me that I was making poor choices. And it turns out they were wrong about all of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that people get that these perspectives that were offered from people out in fiat world, that's their truths that aren't related over here.
Well, their truths are full falsehoods, right? And my experience was very similar. I got yelled at. My in-laws for the longest time, I think, thought I was crazy and thought my wife was insane for marrying me. And they love me. I love them, but I do think they were like, "What the hell is Marty doing with his life, his professional life specifically?" But now they understand. All right, you have a respectable business that you've created, and our daughter's comfortable, and you're able to raise children, so we're okay with that. But going back to like,
did they ever like acknowledge that for you though? Be like,
no,
hey,
not
Marty, like
not
we're
overtly, but
yeah.
and I think there's less questions in the background these days. But the like the fiat life too, like in what that explanation you just went on reminded me of something that I'm very lucky my dad really instilled in us in an early age. Like, you're in control of your own happiness. Like, nobody's going to make you happy but yourself. Like, you have to take control of your life and build a life of purpose so that you can be happy. And in the fiat world, I mean, Bitcoin has given me that happiness, that purpose, and building this media brand and everything else I'm doing in the Bitcoin world has given me a purpose. I don't work. I wake up and I'm invigorated to do what I do. In the fiat life, like, happiness, people are told what to be happy about. Like, join this fantasy league, go to this dollar beer night. Like, you need to get this degree to get this job. That is what will make you happy. Like, again, it's the system saying, all right, if you check this box, this box, you'll be happy. This is the way everything's portrayed, and I think that's the driving force behind the existential dread that exists today, is that people are like, all right, I checked all these boxes and I'm not happy. So I'm just going to continue taking SSRIs. I'm going to end my own life, continue drinking. Like that, like the fact that the two leading cause of deaths in America between the ages of 18 and 45, the prime of life, is overdoses and suicide, is insane. Like, we live in a sick culture, and I think it's because people aren't taking control of their own happiness. They're having other people tell them what will make them happy, trying to do that to become happy, and finding that it does not lead to happiness at all. Again, it's
Well, I mean, like that, those statistics right there, like that's the true pandemic. I mean, like I am absolutely aghast and beside myself the fact that those numbers can present themselves, and that all of society doesn't slam on the brakes and go, "Holy shit, it is time to reorganize." Uh, and in fact, instead of that being the response, we get the exact opposite, where it's, you know what, like, fuck everybody under the age of 50. Like, let's shut all of society down to make sure that we protect these older people. And it's I had an old coworker say to me, any society that makes a decision to sacrifice the young for the old is not one I want to participate in. And that's how I feel too, and it is heartbreaking to think of how much people in our age group are deeply, deeply suffering. And there is no answer to be found inside of political establishments, inside of media, inside of education. Religion is lacking. Like, it's all empty. And it's so, so hurtful and horrifying. and we seem to be rudderless and lost at sea. And that, again, this is why Bitcoin is so important, is because it's this lifeboat that you can cling to, and that it can have you recover actual meaning to the world. That, like, maybe it isn't all just fucking bullshit nihilism, but, like, maybe there actually is a true purpose to this world. And maybe you can discover it inside of yourself by you protecting yourself and rewarding yourself and asking yourself to, convert to your savings, take on a risk, have Bitcoin, and maybe because you make those choices, farther down the line, you're going to be able to take care of yourself better, that you're going to protect your family better, that you're going to be able to help yourself more. And I think these ideas, more so than the actual wealth, it's so important, because if not Bitcoin in this, then what is it? If we're actually going to recover ourselves and not live inside of this horrific panopticon the WEF is presenting, what is it? And as far as I can tell, it has to be Bitcoin, because at this point, there's no shitcoin that has any possibility of doing what we want to do. And in fact, most shitcoins seem to actually be these weird status applications. And I also think that this is one of the things that becomes kind of more astrological in the end. It's like, I actually think like Vitalik's probably gonna like be anointed as like president for life of like some fucked up country, and they'll like make ETH its like reserve currency, but they'll just like get to like randomly give it to whoever they want to. And like the best thing I can say to people is, look, like if you want out of this cage that they've made for you, like we got a seat for you, and we're waiting here. We want to help you. We want to educate you. We want to teach you. But like you have to make that choice for yourself, and it's scary and it's difficult and it can be hard. But I just really want people to know, like, and it's sort of hilarious, particularly with like this idea of toxic Bitcoiners. But like Bitcoiners are some of the greatest people I've ever met. Like, I swear to God, these people give you your shirt right off their back if you ask them for it, and they really want to help you. And that's pretty unique and different for where we're at. So I hope anybody who's listening, that they're being casual about it and they haven't really took the plunge, like, stop and ask yourself, what do you want life to look like in the next 5 years? And ask yourself if you can do that without Bitcoin. And yeah, also, if you just have other questions for us, please reach out. Thanks for watching and participating. And we want you to know that we want you on the Bitcoin standard, not because it helps our numbers go up and it makes us richer. We want you on the Bitcoin standard because I honor, love, and respect you as a human being enough that I want you to have unconfiscatable money, and I want you to want that for me too.
Beautifully put. Get in. I mean, for me personally, just thinking about my journey, in my 20s were very volatile. Very good finance job out of college. Took a risk to get into like product management. Failed miserably at that. Luckily, like my career, I was unemployed for a lot of my 20s too. But luckily, I had Bitcoin all the time, like this personal shelling point for me to use as a guiding light, a North Star, if you will, to always anchor into. Like I always had that feeling throughout my 20s, like, all right, Bitcoin's got some signal. I should keep learning about it, keep acquiring as much as possible, and it's done leaps and bounds for me personally. I think most importantly, it really lit a fire under my ass to start a family. I have a child. I have another one on the way. I have a happy wife. I have a home, and that's what's fulfilling. And that's again, all these people our age who are stuck in the existential dread of the 9 to 5 and going out and partying. A lot of them are waking up at 35 with no kids. And they're like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And nothing will expedite that process faster than focusing on accumulating Bitcoin so that you can accumulate capital to deploy in the future for your family.
Well, and it's interesting that it had that effect on you, because it is true self-ownership that has you look at your life in a responsibility, in a way of being truly responsible for it. And that's exactly what Bitcoin is. It is true self-ownership. You must take responsibility for your wealth and how it is protected in the world, because if you don't, means somebody else is. Somebody that can hurt you, somebody that can take it from you, somebody that can not have your best ideas at heart. And in all honesty, like I really think what we've been talking about the whole time, Marty, is that this is about death. This is about, as human beings, we're going to die. And what do we want to do in order to make this life meaningful here? And how do we want to contribute to it in a meaningful way? Is it by following the fiat bullshit and the authoritarianism that they give us and having our self-ownership extricated from us and put inside of a system where we don't have control? Or is it asking for ourselves to be responsible for our own wealth and to take self-ownership not only of our wealth, but of our commonwealth, of the actual res publica, the public thing, our society and life? And I think that's truly what's happening with Bitcoin, is that we're not only taking responsibility for our own wealth, but the way that that inflects upon us to start taking responsibility for our life, and then how that eventually becomes taking responsibility for our society. Because the truth is that Bitcoiners must take responsibility for all of the shit that is happening in society, because there is no one else. We are the last option.
A lot of work ahead of us, freaks. Erik, I can't believe it took us this long to get on a podcast together. It was a fucking incredible 2-hour conversation. I can't wait to do it again. If you ever come to Texas, please let me know. We'd love to meet up in person. Maybe do one of these in person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marty. I deeply appreciate your work, and it's great to hear you wake up and it's not work for you. It's your purpose. And to me, like, this is the shit that I absolutely love about Bitcoin, is because, like, I don't think you ever had an idea in your life that this is what you would be doing in early 2022. And it probably excites the absolute hell out of you. And this is how it is for so many Bitcoiners that I know, is that as you go deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, it starts to transform you. You start to get empowered by others. You start to be nourished by their content. You become more powerful. And so, like, I just really want to say I celebrate the work that you do, and I look forward to seeing you again in person and giving you a bear hug. And I'll probably be visiting Texas because I'll be terrified of how I'm going to get exploited by the state here in California. So I hope that's not true, and I hope that when I get my psychedelic compound, because, like, I'm trying to buy this 150 acres for people to come and be able to do psychedelics and have spiritual experiences. So hopefully it'll all work out, and if it does, you and many other Bitcoiners are invited to come and participate, because that's my other passion. So.
Well, I'm a big fan of psychedelics. I'll definitely be making the trip if and when that land is acquired. And speaking of content that's fulfilling, Erik's got some of the most fulfilling content in the Bitcoin space. CryptoSovereignty.org is the website. If you really want to get esoteric and dive deep into the why and the philosophy behind the revolution that is Bitcoin, highly recommend going to check out all these pieces. You're going to be better off for it, freaks. I think you're going to be better off for this conversation too, Erik. You're fucking very high energy. This was a very high energy rip. I'm very excited. I've got another podcast at 3. I thought I was going to be a little tired after having this long conversation, but I'm like ready to go.
Awesome, man. Well, I look forward to the next time that we get to chat. Thanks to all the freaks for joining us. And, buy Bitcoin, know that the world is good, and that we're going to be transforming stuff in a positive way to create a world that is so much more exciting and profound than you ever thought it could be.
Let's do it, freaks. Peace and